Good morning.
Hey.
Welcome back to Conference on the Couch, Day 3.
Yay.
Wow, how's everyone holding up?
Woo!
All right, so as those of you who have been here before know, my name is Samara Halperin. I'm the curator, coordinator with Current for Conference on the Couch. And here we are, Day 3, intervening in media. So yeah, welcome back. So it's, those of you who have not been here before, Conference on the Couch is a very sort of a special. I'm just going to quote Current. It is the heart of the festival. A lot of sort of feelings get sort of thrown up in the air. They fly in different directions. We catch them and we like hold them or let them go. I think that that's like how I feel about this space. I'm like already feeling nostalgia for the ending of the conference part of Outsider Fest 2020. This is our second year where Conference on the Couch has been co-sponsored by LGBTQ Studies at University of Texas at Austin. And we have, where's Lisa?
Right.
Oh, there. Lisa Moore is the director of LGBTQ Studies. So thank you for partnering with us. It's a pleasure to go back and forth between cross.
Thank you for the
yes.
opportunity.
Yeah. So I'm not going to say much more because you know the drill, and I'm just going to hand it over to PJ Raval, who is not going to be moderating. And also, we're in PJ and Current's house, by the way. If this is your first time, let's thank them. And also, there's a bathroom back here. If you're in the back section, the easiest way is probably to go that way, right? There's a door that connects to the hall here. There's also, of course, coffee and other things to sustain you through this next couple hours. And so,
Great, thanks. Thank you, everyone. This is really exciting because, you know, I'm part of Outsider and I have been to all the conference on the couches and I have never participated in one, so this is kind of cool. Kind of interesting to be sitting on my own couch with all of you. Usually I'm standing next to Curran over there, so this is nice. But it's an honor to be asked to moderate this panel, and I'm super excited about this panel because I am a filmmaker also. And I've been to many film panel events where the panels are about getting ahead in the industry or getting your voice out there. And just looking already at the couch and the lineup of panelists, I think this is going to be a very special panel with a lot of interesting conversation. And we never really get a chance to talk about our ideas. And so I really want to just focus on that rather than, you know, where the product goes necessarily in terms of that, but just kind of where it comes from and what you hope to accomplish out of it. So with that said, I know the conference format is usually like reading bios, but I'm not very good at that. And I think for me, it's also thinking about visuals and image making. I always like it when people actually talk about themselves because I can focus in on who they are and see their faces and, you know, kind of absorb whatever they're saying. So I'm going to start it off with, one of the things that struck me about the description of this panel was using the words filmmaking, movie making, but image making. And I really like that idea of image making because I think nowadays this idea of filmmaking has kind of become what some of my friends and I would call like filmmaking with a capital F, like it's very like filmmaking, you know, and when we think about that, so I like the idea of image making and it going back to some of the reasons why I got very interested in image making is the power of images, right? And what they can do in terms of representing, storytelling, experiential, you name it, right? So I was hoping we could maybe first go around and if you could introduce yourselves by, you know, saying your name, maybe a brief introduction into what, you know, if there are any early images that kind of come to mind that you think about that maybe drew you into your practice or to the kind of work that you're making now, and maybe also introduce kind of your relationship to image making.
Oh wow, okay. Do it first. Hi everyone, my name is Aymar Christian. Folks often call me AJ. And I am a professor, kind of like Curran, who also works with artists. I'm based in Chicago, out of Northwestern. And my relationship to image making, an image that strikes in my mind that connects to my practice. I'll pick two, if you don't mind. Just kind of like historically speaking, I watched a lot of TV in the 90s and I do TV now. And TV in the 90s was like a moment where you could actually like see black people on TV, which wasn't the case in like the 2000s much. And then now it's back. We're back on TV, y'all. So actually, I always remember the image of the Men On skit in Living Single, right?
You mean in Living Color?
In Living Color, sorry, oh my god.
Living Single was a fun black show too.
Also, I've been thinking a lot about Living Single because I feel like it needs to be rebooted, but that's in Living Color, thank you, Lamar. And you know, that was kind of perceived as being a very homophobic kind of representation, and maybe also transphobic too. But it also for me, like as a kid, was like, oh wow, there's like black people who are like that, who are like men, but they don't seem like the kind of men that are around me. So that was like super formative. And then most recently, I study web series and I help people make web series primarily. So I was super inspired by Issa Rae's The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl, which was, I think, for me it changed my mind about filmmaking and image making because it was kind of like roughly produced. It wasn't like super slick, especially in the first season, but it was well written and people like were talking about it because it spoke specifically to an experience of a black woman who was not like the kinds of black women that you see on TV.
All right. Hello, I'm Samara Halperin. It's pronounced Samara like mascara. I'm a filmmaker, film and video maker, and animator from New York, but I live in Oakland. I'm also a professor of experimental video production and everything that goes along with that. I like your question, and it always, with me, it's a very easy answer. I would say when I was 11, my mother took me to see Polyester at the New Yorker Theater on Broadway and 88th Street, 89th. It doesn't exist anymore. And that was the movie with odorama cards. Do people know what an odorama card is?
No.
When you would go into the movie, a number would come up on the screen, and you would scratch and sniff the odorama card. Urine. Gasoline. Yes. But to be a little bit more serious, seeing Divine on the screen. You know, I was a little young, perhaps, but it changed my life forever. My mother regretted it. She put a block at the video store on Pink Flamingos and Desperate Living, also on Broadway and 87th. But yeah, so it really, for me, it was John Waters, and I had a horrible time in film school, undergrad and grad, and now I'm a teacher trying to not do what I was taught. But I always like to go back to like what with my students, like what makes you want to make movies. With me, it's Odorama and Divine.
We actually have a Divine candle over there, if you haven't seen it. Yeah, it's handcrafted.
That's all Queer Houses should.
Right? In honor too.
Comes from Silky's year one at the festival.
Oh, that's right, yeah. Relax with it, yeah.
It's my turn now.
Yes.
Look at that. I'm caught in my headphones. I'm Lamar. I'm a composer. I guess I think of myself as a composer first, and then a singer, and then someone who plays instruments. My first relationship to image making was making myself. And it seemed that, like making myself had to be against and through and over imperialist white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. And so there's all these sort of images of, I identify as a black man, there are all these images of black men that we see men on, or, any number of things, you know. And there was never sort of an image of a black man that I saw that was like, I thought, this is me. Never. I still haven't. That's why I make work, primarily. And so that I compose these things, and that sort of led me into the film and video stuff that I do. I have an unreleased feature film. If anyone wants to, you know, show it someplace. And I need a little money. The soundtrack is I want to do a 5.1 sort of mix it, because the sound was kind of why I wanted to make a film partially. So anyway, if someone has money do that would be really helpful. So I have this unreleased feature film, and so making myself, then there was always this sort of thing of like, then how do I see something of myself in image making? So then of course you make your own. And so that's sort of a lot of the impetus for me making sort of video, so things that sort of started as music videos and then got into sort of experimental video, and then that led to the film. And then I also sort of want to image the other black men who are in the feature film. Like I sort of like want to image them in sort of like models of punk and goth. Like I'm really committed to that aesthetic. And sort of the formative film moments. And I want to say too, first off the bat, that I love cinema and I hate it at the same time, because there's so many possibilities that are sort of unrealized. One of the sort of seminal, like Pasolini's Salo was really important to me because I had a boyfriend in high school who loaned me 120 Days of Sodom by Marquis de Sade. And this is my senior year in high school, so that was like a really, like, and then I saw Pasolini's Salo after that, and I was like, oh my god, this is like insane and wonderful and fantastic. And so that cinematic moment, seeing Salo via, you know, having a relationship to the Sade text, and then Looking for Langston by Isaac Julian, that, and then sort of through to Moonlight, like that seemed to be, those two cinematic moments are really the only moments I can think of. Maybe someone has another example that you can, you know, educate me about, where people are interested in the interior lives of black men. They're not interested in sort of imagining like black masculinity through some sort of prison thing or gangster thing or hyper-masculine thing or whatever. We know what all the stereotypes are. I mean, that there was this sort of sustained focus on, you know, in Isaac Julian's film, and in also the interior life of a black man, and then certainly in Moonlight, there was this like interiority that was like, and that's the great thing about film, right? You can film in interiority. It's not like about what you see, but what you don't see, what's in the shadows, and so the shadows that are in the light that's cast, and so that. And horror is also my genre, so I'm interested in like Ghost and that sort of thing, Cabin of Dr. Caligari, or that moment in Nosferatu when the vampires are walking up the stairs and you see his shadow. Anyway, I can go on and on. It's your turn.
All right, I'm Evie Snax. I'm part of the Hot Bits crew. I'm a visual artist and a curator. I live in Philadelphia, and I work on a lot of collaborative projects. I also have my personal practice, which is mostly in photography, collage, and film. For my influences, I feel like, well, my mother, I always have to credit as my first influence. She's a visual artist. She's kind of a modernist abstract painter, so I feel like her work is kind of highbrow, and mine's like really lowbrow, but somehow I still am able to take just being in an art environment growing up as my influence in my work. I think that like I think my mom's practice was like a lot about discipline, which I aim for, and I will never reach like she does, but that's something that's like really important for artists to be able to practice. And then of course her like vision is something that's like so far from mine, but still I hope that, you know, there's pieces of her vision in mine also. And then also like 90s music videos, which is what I grew up watching, and what I love about music videos is that they're so glamorous. I feel like the filmmaking process is so experimental. Like, it doesn't have to have a narrative, it doesn't have to make sense at all. It just has to be like entertaining, really, or beautiful, or express some sort of emotion or feeling, or express something about you know, the artist or about the song or about, it's just visuals that are used to complement this audio, and music is so open-ended. It also doesn't have to, you know, communicate a very specific point. So I like that about music videos, and I guess I take that now into porn. Like, my porns are most of the time not narrative. I'm interested in communicating an emotion through the images, and for it to be entertaining and like quick. I don't really like making super slow movies where you have to contemplate like what's going on. No, I'm gonna give you some nice things to look at, and you won't want to look away because it's really nice, looks good. It'll be over before you want it to be, so it's very satisfying. You know, like you want more. I always leave people wanting a little bit more, so that's kind of where I come from.
I'm Heartburn, and I'm also part of the Hot Bits Collective. And I am a filmmaker with a background in documentary. And my influences, I watched a lot of musicals growing up, in part because my parents are dancers and my mom's a choreographer, and I grew up loving dancing, and I love musicals for the dancing elements. But I also, I think, absorbed a lot of negative and complicated understandings of what relationships are supposed to be, because a lot of the musicals are from like the 50s and 60s, are very misogynistic and sexist. And so I think I feel like the power of the image, and how like I feel like I understood the adult world through those musicals, and as I became an adult realized like how messed up that worldview they were portraying, and how I want to make media that represents the kind of world that I want to live in, and that will be the examples that are not misogynistic and sexist. And so I also, in my documentary background, think a lot about who is behind the camera, or who is making the work, and who is in front of the camera. And I feel like with the that's informed the work with Hot Bits to place an emphasis on self-representation and being in control of the image that is being produced.
It's me. Okay. Hi. Sorry I'm late. My contact got stuck in my eye. It's really painful. But enough about me. My name is Ghuman Jr. I'm a writer, director, I guess visual video maker. I'm terrible at this. Born in Miami, like long walks on the beach. Caught some Sagittarius. I don't know. I mean, our influences, right? I got so into your stories. I'm like, okay. All right, let's do this. From Miami, I grew up kind of like the only white kid in my neighborhood, so I was part of that kind of cliche situation. Became a break dancer. My influences are pulled from that, and all my work, I do music videos and films and stuff. Well, I've done one movie called Sport. That was like my only, like, I made a real movie, sold it to Warner Brothers and stuff, about a girl who's a spork, who's not a girl, not a boy, not a spoon, not a fork. She was intersex. There's a lot of characters that I can, I can represent fully in it as well. But it was a dark comedy, and I guess stuff like Edward Scissorhands, Welcome to the Dollhouse, stuff like that really affected me. Being the only white kid in my neighborhood in Miami, because it was all, Cuban and people of color. My side of it was like what they call white trash, trailer park. So obviously it was weird to like be like, you're white, you're privileged. I'm like, oh, I was called white trash my whole life. So that was a weird cusp to walk. And then to go into the other side of it and be like, yo, 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 but then it's like, oh my God, you're a faggot. And I was like, wait, what? So got kicked out of that scene. And then came into the film world, and it's like, I have this idea to make this movie about this girl named Spork. I'm like, that's fucking gross. It's like, what? So, but I got the money and I made it. And I won Tribeca and like London and stuff, and it was like a really cool high for me for a minute. And then I went to the studio system, and I got offered some horror movies and stuff like that, and I was like, oh my god, I'm really sensitive. So I couldn't do that. And then I got offered some bigger stuff, I guess, like Mighty Mouse, which I probably should have done because the money was so cute. But anyways, I went from that to doing installation art videos and stuff like that to keep it moving with all the stuff I said before, to make my own French, because all these different perspectives seem to be like, this side sucks, we rock. Even as a gay man, I was like, I'm with gay people, and they're like, oh, straight people suck. I'm like, oh, that's not very nice. And then I hang out with gay men, and they're like, oh, girls are disgusting. And I was like, that's not cool. I think vagina and women are beautiful. I just happen to be gay. And I hang out with girls, and they'd be like, just don't be a sissy fag, and you're cool. I'm like, what? So to me, perspectives are very blurred, and I find double standards to be on like every corner and every scene. So I got really quiet, and I just make my work, and I don't judge, because I know that everyone has their story. And things like Edward Scissorhands' Welcome to Dollhouse, and 90s music videos, and actually old school gay porn definitely affected me.
70s.
Yeah. Like my film, The Art of Being, that opened the festival, which was such an honor to be here. I end up jerking off in a power glove in it, so I'm all about expressing yourself and letting it move forward. But I am really big on the edges of perspectives. My mom was Christian. That whole trailer park trash community that I grew up in, as people call it, was very Christian. And then on my dad's side, my dad's from India, I'm biracial. Obviously they divorced within like 30 years, but I got given to this planet in this form. And I would go to Gurdwara on Thursdays, he's Sikh, so I would have to worship their God, which has the exact same story of Jesus, virgin, 3-day, turn. I was like, that's weird. So those kind of parallels stuck out to me a lot, and that influences my work. Like my film, The Art of Being, and even in sport, there's a lot of spiritual references and stuff. But then I'd go into the spiritual scene, and they're like, we're conscious, everyone is ignorant. I was like, fuck, everyone is just judging everybody. So I just kind of, made my own fish tank, and I'm still doing that now. And I guess just learning and observing and expressing. Terrible at this. I'm glad my back is too.
Thank you for that.
Welcome to the Dollhouse is like my least interesting for Todd Salons, though. I love like Happiness or storytelling so much more.
Too dark.
Sorry.
For me, no judgment.
No, I'm really dark.
Yeah.
I'm really dark.
Okay.
Welcome to the Dollhouse. Anyway, but that's interesting. I think.
So I want us to start thinking about space. How many of you saw the performance last night of Dorian Wood?
Yes.
I mean, amazing, right? Or any of you see the Queer Croning?
Yeah.
Also amazing, right? And so one of the things that always strikes me about the programming in the festival, so brilliantly programmed by Curry Null, is that I love, and people have come up to me during the festival saying, I love what's being created here. It's a community, it's a space, it's a way to explore, it's a way to engage. And when I start thinking about image making, filmmaking, I'm thinking about it in this idea of space, right? Like we oftentimes have this two-dimensional space where we're projecting something, right? But also thinking about this idea of space of like a captive audience, right? Or thinking about space in terms of the space that you're creating within a film industry, right? Or maybe the space on the screen, right? Whether that be animation, for instance. So I kind of want to get your take on this idea of what you see yourself doing in terms of your own practice, thinking about space, right? And also opening it up to this idea of like, so for instance, and Lamar, you yourself saying, you think of yourself mostly as a composer, as a musician, but clearly we have images being projected, so you're also creating a unique experience, right? Like this isn't something that I could probably stream on Netflix and experience it, right?
You could, but it wouldn't be the same.
Exactly, I have to be present for it. And it's something that's also kind of fleeting, right? Whereas a lot of the times when we think about filmmaking, we think, oh, it's going to be there forever, we can watch it, we can just stream it, but there's something about the experience itself that's being created. So, so I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on this concept of space.
Are you asking me or just everyone?
Everyone, yeah, whoever wants to jump in first.
I mean, yeah, it's funny. A lot of the film that I'm sort of working on, like a lot of the feature film has been kind of the last 2 years apart in various parts of what I use for the performances. I mean, I think a lot of what I'm doing with compositions is about kind of scoring a silent film. Like I think that like I'm really interested in silent film. Like I'm really interested in like what that, and I mean also looking for Langston's very much in that kind of conversation too. That sort of silent film thing and The Attendant. If you do, people know those as Julian films. Looking for Langston and The Attendant. Anyway, so I'm very interested in that kind of aesthetic and that sensibility. And so I kind of like I'm not interested in like sort of like being an entertaining performer like or anything or like sort of like. Being sort of on display or a spectacle in any way, and I sort of feel like the use of cinema in the performance gets to have the focus on whatever is on the screen versus me. Like I think of myself as sort of a sound maker, a noise maker, and less as a performer. Like I'm very ambivalent about sort of like being in front of people, which seems strange. But I'm really like I have really like a lot of contempt in a way for I think what audiences I think want to do with me, what I imagine they want to do with me, what they sometimes tell me they want to do with me, and with images of black people or sort of like people you can't place easily. Like I've sort of struggled a lot in my making with like people needing to place me somewhere. And I just really am not interested in being placed anywhere, really. And I think that's a really difficult thing in image making, to go back to that question. If you are trying to make an image that is that you can't read, you know, it is unreadable, it frustrates people in a way that like, I think people have a difficulty in just sort of accepting or appreciating what you see versus like trying to sort of name it as something. Like I think about Ornette Coleman. He had this sort of quote about the any pleasure you would get from a thing is along with it. It's not through sort of consuming it or interpreting it or deciding that it is a thing. You know, and so like I think like part of the thing with why I like to use images in performances is it kind of it gives me a certain kind of control where I'm sort of not the focus, like where I think that and when you frame something you can sort of really control what people are looking at. Like that's a lot of why I make video and film, because I mean on a stage like I'm actually thinking about I'm trying to stage this piece called Speculum Warm, one of my I'm not gonna sing in it like you know with the props and a set and stuff. And so the difficulty of theater is that people can look at the exit sign or, you know, whatever they want to look at in a theater, which is great and wonderful and fantastic. But in cinema, you can force people to, you can frame it and, you know, you can look at this from this angle and this way, and I sort of love that. But the thing about the sort of singularity of a musical experience in a room, it was great being back at the Vortex. Like there's something very special about that room and to make sound in that room. And I have this like these thoughts about like acoustic making instruments like violins or voices or like there's something about particularly treble acoustic instruments being in a room and the way they resonate in a room is there's nothing like that experience. I'm just sort of in love with that thing of something that happens in space, and moving through, like my rehearsals are very different than like any performance I've ever done, because you're moving through time. Because all my pieces are narrative. I don't know if anyone saw my performances this year, last year, but they have this like loose narrative in the way that the feature film that I need funding for has this loose narrative that you can sort of move with. And have space. Like I'm very interested in not being entertaining. For example, I'm interested in being very slow, and producing things that people have to sort of think a lot about, and where you have to sort of put yourself in it, and sort of think about where you are and who you are versus this like this what it seems like you're doing, which is wonderful, especially if you're doing porn. I mean, porn, there's no time for for contemplation. Anyway, do you have thoughts about space? Space is interesting. Space. Do you have thoughts about space and porn?
Yeah, I mean, a completely different track, but you want to speak?
Sure. Yeah, because I think my motivation for so Snax and I started Hot Bits 4 years ago, and it came after we attended the Berlin Porn Film Festival together with a film that we both worked on. And I think for me, being there and like being in a space, in a theater with other queer people watching queer bodies experiencing pleasure was like an immensely affirming experience. And I just like, I loved the feeling that I had there. But I also, there were ways in which that festival, like, it was a bit chaotic. It felt like the people staffing the festival were all stressed out, and it was like events like back to back. And I was like, I really like what's going on here, but the way that this environment feels, like I would want it to be different, and if I were to do it. And I think Snax also had criticisms of that festival as well, so we were interested in doing it our own way. And for me, that was I wanted to be really intentional and work and continue to work on how the space feels, and paying attention to or thinking about like what experiences could people be coming in with, how can we meet people's needs for being in a space, watching vulnerable material, and like everyone has so much baggage with this stuff. But I also wanted to bring that feeling of affirmation that I felt to the folks in my community. And I think that there's something just really powerful about coming together physically, gathering in one place, and then watching pleasures and bodies that look like you or don't look like you, and just like celebrating their pleasure in community.
Mm-hmm.
Heart is also really good at decorating space. So like a huge part of our festival is like what the actual environment is like.
Yeah.
So it's both like efforts towards accessibility and making sure everybody is accounted for, everybody's made to be able to access our space.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also like creating an environment, so Heart will go and put up like velvet curtains everywhere, lots of warm, soft colors, and there's like a tea area with headphones, so that like if you feel overexposed and you need a moment away from the films, you have a safe space to go. There's like, go ahead.
Oh, this is I think also on the topic of space, I think what we are trying to do is also provide a platform for content that doesn't have as many avenues for distribution or to be seen out that's in like a collective festival setting where you can like see it with the actual people there, not just like sell it to a porn distributor and have it be for consumption online only. And as well, we also work with performers for the festivals that we do in Philly and Baltimore and Boston. And I think also providing a space for performers who don't have access to other kinds of venues to show their work, giving them the space and paying them for the work that they do, I think is also important, and how we are thinking about space.
It's like when you're watching films, it's so it's just on a screen, and I love your work because there's both the screen to look at, and then there's you, a living body right there, and live music happening also.
A living undead body. Yeah.
So the films, and then having some performances where there's like burlesque dancers or pole dancers that can bring you back into your body a little bit, especially with the content of the films being so physical and vulnerable. And I feel like I feel like the project that we're doing is a little bit of a sex education, like it's a fun adult sex education where we don't get access to sex education, nor do we want to show up to a classroom and listen to somebody lecture us, but a lot of what we learn about sex comes from porn, and a lot of what we find online is like not intended to be educational, but it is educating the masses. Our films are really intentionally curated. They all have, radical politics and come from a come from the right perspectives, come from the people. So it's like, also there's like this experience, what I'm trying to say is that there's this experience of watching film where you're just quiet and you're just receiving. But a part of the space is that we're actually building community in the places that we go, and that's about the spaces after the films where people actually get to know each other. And I feel like the films and the art is almost an excuse to bring the right type of people into the room, so that when the after party happens, which is so much easier to organize, like the after party is actually, takes less labor to organize, but the audience looks forward to the after party more, even though the film festival, it only happens once a year, and it's like nowhere else can you access these films. There's a party there's multiple parties every weekend, but still it's like that human connection that is ultimately like the most powerful. And
I was thinking about, well, first of all, to speak about being quiet and receiving, I know lots of bottoms, thank God, who love to do that.
Can we have a moment just thank you, bottoms?
Being quiet and receiving. But also this, like, I think that one of the things I think about constantly in relationship to sort of like, sort of imagining like radical politics, some sort of woke world that everyone wants to, at least on Twitter, wants to imagine themselves in. That if there isn't like a sort of a shift in the way that people are watching pornography and what they're jerking off to, that we're just sort of doomed. And I mean, pornography is deeply sexist, we understand, deeply misogynist, deeply racist, and sort of like invested in like really archaic, like plantational kinds of narratives around race, like literally like plantation shit, and so I just think that like, how is it that there's just no way to progress without talking at length about like what, like, say, I always imagined Jerry Wilson, the police officer who killed Mike Brown, was maybe watching some cuckolding porn and imagining some like big black man like fucking his wife in some like erotic. This is the whole thing, and then because he's imagining Mike Brown as being so much bigger than him, but they're the same height. It's like there's this way that like people are imagining black men and black masculinity via porn that has, I think, real life effects, like in people being shot by police officers, imagining that they're so much bigger than you and so much more monstrous than anything you could ever imagine, that it's a part of the white supremacist imagination that we really have from plantational times. So it seems like a lot of the work that you seem to be doing in making porn, and that I'm trying to do, at least try sort of deconstructing this stuff, is like, how do we look at this and deal with this in some deep way? Because we're really not gonna, any kind of movement that we want to have isn't going anywhere if we don't like decolonize our porn, if we don't like No, I mean, this is really serious. I mean, any black person, I don't know if you guys are on those apps, Jacked or Grindr, I mean, it just like if you were a black man who says you're top, like there's other men of color, white men, everyone's coming to you with really specific ideas about black masculinity, and it's like really not, there's no room for real black men in that stuff. I mean, there's not room for like real people to exist in real ways. And so anyway, that's
Can I say thank you to Tops also?
Yeah, Samara.
I like to talk about a different type of space. But there's a lot of porn that happens there too. So I really like thinking about space, and as a teacher I always talk about like the space within the frame is important, but not as important as the space outside of the frame, and always leave them wanting something more and all of that stuff. So that's just like the film frame or the video frame. But my own personal work is very much about forgotten spaces. I think it's pretty much all I do, actually, when I was thinking about your question. So, for instance, I've spent the past, 15 years, first I started documenting Astroland in Coney Island when it was going to be torn down. I knew the plan. I went there every summer to document the family-owned businesses that have been there for 100 years that would not be replaced. So first I did that, then I built it all in miniature. That took, let's say, 8 more years. And now I'm using it to animate a world in which, yes, I am the god of an animation set. And so I live in the Bay Area, okay? Nobody has studios. I don't have a studio. You can't have a studio. The most I can have really is a table. I am the god of that table. I'm going to take it where I can get it. And, it's the Coney Island that I remember. but also it's a Coney Island where there's queer cruising under the boardwalk, which of course there was, but not all day long, that kind of thing. Thinking about the spaces within Shaboom, like the Reagan videos, what I want to talk about, like, for those of you who saw Shaboom the other night, there's a scene that takes place in the Oval Office with Nancy, Reagan, and their family chimp, obviously. And so just thinking about a space like that, all the horrible, disgusting, homophobic, racist, misogynist, anti-Semitic, every single bigotry that happened in there, having the opportunity to recreate that space in which to give everybody this privileged access. Maybe you don't want to see what's going on in there, but I certainly thought about it a lot. So that type of space, right, it's giving that access, I think is really exciting. And then the last thing I want to say about it, because here I am in Austin, and so my film
His whole life was horrible. This kid was like rocking, crazy face and crazy hair is what they would call him, in like a town where people were like, you're a fucking freak. Black people, white people, his own white trash, poor white community, they thought he was a complete alien. And he was like, I don't give a fuck. And I found that interesting. I found it empowering. But at the same time, I couldn't stand him. I was like, yo, you're a dick.
I mean, my grandfather was he's dead now. Horrible human being, like awful. Like he raped my grandmother. He beat all his 10 children. I'm completely empathetic to his experience. He grew up in a sharecropping situation. He was brutalized as a child, beaten by like white landowners. I have all kinds of empathy for him, but he was a terrible person. So I mean, we can, I hear you around empathy. We can have, empathy maybe for the deeply and profoundly racist white person. We can empathize with them, but at a certain point, there's some kind of responsibility you have to have for yourself in a system that is unequal.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Use the empathy using the empathy for change, not to sit there and be like, I understand why you are the way you are, as this person judges you and knocks you down, or a system just dismantles your art. I'm like, no, that's fucking horrible.
Yeah.
But at the same time, empathy can be at the very least a part of the arsenal, so that it's less of a like, fuck you, no fuck you. This is my system. Well, I'm here to burn it down. I'm like, well, there's a way to communicate where there can be actual growth. That's all I'm coming from. It's like me and Jeffree Star. We're actually at a better place now.
What's interesting is like, how do you have that growth in a corporate capitalist system? I think it's like
communication.
Exactly, which is like it has to happen in spaces like this, and I think that's the problem with like Jeffree Star. It's like, and that whole YouTube economy. If there is a problem with it, it's like you're broadcasting to like millions of people, and then there's like the comment section, right? And it's just like people who don't know each other, can't see each other, yelling at each other.
Yeah.
Like that's the dark side of all this environment we're in right now. It's like there's so few spaces like this where you can just sit down and have a real conversation and like talk about the complexities. And I feel like, I mean, bringing it back to space, it's like these spaces are so important, but they are also so rare.
Can I just say, I'm so far outside of all this mainstream Hollywood, big budgets, all of this type of, sorry, my voice. So Hobbits has been dealing with this issue of getting censored out of every place that is
we
like
can't advertise on Facebook because our content
all of our like social platforms get censored, and then like when we're actually trying to book a venue, we're coming. I'm walking into an art gallery as an artist, and somebody will be like, oh my god, you're with Hobbits, I love Hobbits, we would love to work with you. Next, great, let's do a screening. Next thing we know, the institution that they're part of is like, hell to the no, we will not be associated with that thing. We even had somebody, an institution that originally said, we want more programming like this, then come for us and say that our project had no artistic value or cultural value whatsoever.
Because of the Supreme Court obscenity laws.
That we're like that what we're doing is obscene and has no value whatsoever.
Well, I assume that hope it's obscene.
But obscene doesn't mean it doesn't have any value,
That's
right. And that was the part that it was just like horrible. So it's just like, in a lot of places, they're like, there's, the small peoples who are working the venues or working the spaces, are part of our community and are like, we're moved by your work, yada yada. But we've had big struggles trying to get grants. We've had big struggles trying to get venues that actually seat our audience, because our audience has grown and is so big. We need a big theater to be able to fit everybody, but we actually can't book one because one, all the theaters are closing, and two, they're all super conservative. And
Or
you
like
actually
could
can be liberal but still be too conservative
And the thing
for
is,
our project.
the one that rejected us, like they was like, so you can, they were
One
gonna
of
like
the many
partner
that
with
rejected
us, and so like we wouldn't have to pay so much, or they wouldn't have to pay for the space. But then when they're like, no, we can't partner with you because of these obscenity laws. But then you can pay. But then like, well, this is too expensive. Like we don't have the budget to like pay for this space. So it's like in a
But
difficult.
we will sell out your theater,
Right.
you know, so.
Yeah, just like a hard position to be in of being like a small volunteer run collective, so we don't have a lot of capital to get the kind of space for our audience, but then when we try to like work with or make relationships with places, they're like scared off by our work. So we're making it work, but it's just, you know, more hoops.
I
for us to
wonder,
jump
like,
through.
with Outsiders' ability to get a lot of funding and have a lot of support, I feel like the branding of Outsider at Outsider Festival is clearly a queer festival, but it's not branded as a queer festival. And I wonder if, and then y'all are showing porn. Showing all this radical work. And it's like y'all have been able to like slide this stuff in, and your funders aren't thinking, oh, I'm funding queers to watch porn.
Yes, they are.
But
Our funders are like people in this room.
excuse me, that's not happening. Please giving money and contact us. We got business cards too. Okay, another thing is that in my personal life, I was doing spells to make the devil go away for like administrative bureaucratic shit that I was dealing with in my
I'm
personal
trying to
life.
make the devil come, but anyway.
Then these institutions started turning their backs on us. And at first I was like, oh, you know, like, let us come in there. And, you know, I really wanted to push our way in and force these spaces that are, you know, downtown or whatever to accommodate us. And then I sort of had to sit back and understand this blessing that actually the devil turned his back and ran away with his money, with his capitalist money and his resources. And we have to turn to our smaller community spaces and do it in a way that feels good and intimate. And I think that's actually a blessing in disguise. And I think the devil just ran away from us. And I think that had to do with some of the spells that were happening.
I have more questions for you, but I want to make sure I open it up to the audience just in case anyone has a comment. Yes. Let's go with Gretchen first, and then we'll come to Robin.
I'm Gretchen, a longtime Austinite crone. I really just want to quickly say that longing for the space that is direct and isn't mediated by the internet and those kinds of things, I do think it's a deep spiritual longing precisely for that. And for myself, as sensitive as I am, I couldn't have made the work that I made with anonymous comments. I couldn't have. That did not exist. When people hated on me, they had to find my P.O. box. They had to write a letter to the monthly gay rag that had been published. And what people who are taking in a bunch of hate have as a sort of force field around them, I'm just in awe. It's not something that I could do. And so I'm just going to say, from the time machine that I live, yes, every time it's just unmediated and it's together and a human is talking to a human. Those comments, I call that inside voice. That's inside voice. You may go to safe space around the kitchen table and rag on somebody, but you don't do it to their fucking face. And I think that this, I'm not going to call it civility, I'm not going to call it empathy, I don't know what I'm going to call it, but it is a substantially different sensation, which is the directness of the humans in space being with each other, that somehow there's still a modicum of respect that exists, and we gotta ride that. We gotta ride that in terms of these differences. So when you're thinking and you're doing your thing and you go back to your lands and I go back to my now far off frozen land, it is when the humans are together and talking about this stuff that I think is when the sparks are gonna really fly, you know, and when you're gonna see how that person walks, regardless of what their face looks like, and have that kind of desire, and have that kind of a desire for, you know, to be together, which is what all the queers want, you know, and which is what we're reaching for is to be able to reach. And when you reach, for me, when I reach to the internet, there's a motherfucking troll cutting me off and makes me not want to. Thank you.
Rob, I'm going to get to you in a second. I actually want to jump in for a second because it actually leads to what my other question was going to be. Is I do think when we are thinking about image making or image makers, there's a certain kind of understanding that images can go far, right? And this idea of mass appeal, mass audiences, we were just talking about that. And I think along with that comes these discussions of responsibility, right? Like, what are you putting out there? What are you trying to say about LGBTQ plus culture? What are you trying to say about, whatever topic or message you have? And it becomes a very public discussion in a way that I think is somewhat interesting, right? Because they think you have the power to proliferate this message, right? So along with that comes these constraints, right? That are kind of placed upon you also. Like, whose story are you going to tell? How are you going to tell it? Like, are you going to be the one person, who's telling this one story? Some friends and I, we always talk about how there's always like the one, right? Like there's like the one Asian American filmmaker that the media loves to talk about, and what are they presenting in terms of Asian American voices, that kind of thing. So thinking about this year's theme, the like nasty fruits, bad apples, I think everyone on this panel is making work that's challenging, right? Notions of narrative, representation, even concepts of comfort, right? Because I think a lot of people sometimes think like, oh, I'm gonna watch something to just kind of zone out and go into it. But even like your work, Emma, right? Talking about like that space that's being created, like you might zone out, but where are you zoning out into, right? So kind of my question is for you, if you wrestle with that in terms of whether it be comments that you get on the internet or pushback from a venue or someone saying, you as a queer artist, you need to be making work that's positive to the queer community. Why are you doing this? That kind of thing.
I'd like to speak to that.
Yeah.
And also to what Gretchen said about kind of in person versus on the internet. My thesis review when I was in college, it was a long time ago, but my professor said directly to me after watching my movie, nobody's ever going to watch your stupid little queer films, and walked out. I paid for this school, by the way. I worked my ass off, but that was the parting words I was given. And also, he called me a man-hater. Okay, there's that too, which I've never been a man-hater. So I spent the next 20 years trying to prove this guy. His name is Dennis. I'll say his name, I will. And I've never said it publicly before either, but trying to prove him wrong because lo and behold, at the college I went to, now he's teaching queer cinema classes. And this is real, and this is how it works. And now I can go teach queer cinema classes there too, but what I'm saying is I had an enemy to fight against, and it was this guy. Also, my parents hated my work and were deeply, brokenly, horrifically homophobic at the time. I had to fight against them so hard, because nobody believed in me. I had to believe in myself, and so when I teach my students, I say, you're your own press kit, you're your own PR firm, you're your own everything, because nobody else is going to help you, right? But telling the stories that need to be told, I personally don't believe people can only speak from their own experience. God forbid, I don't want to watch those movies. I don't want to even watch them if I make them, personally. I think with integrity and with collaboration with community, you can get that incredible work And I would always say, look to the film Night and Fog about the Holocaust by Lamar, which speaks very directly to how do you tell a story that's not your story to tell. I think it's a very important question, and if it was considered more in Hollywood, certainly, and yeah, it is slowly, the world changes, but it's always playing catch up to radical art, right? And that's the cycle we're in. Thank God we lead it, even if we're not compensated for it all the way.
Yes. Or even encouraged most of the time.
When you make radical art, you kind of expect pushback.
Yeah.
But I feel like because like the spaces of exhibition are so curated, both in Chicago and even online, like I don't get nasty comments. Like we release bad representations of all kinds of communities, and actually the people who want that find it, and they're like, give me more. And I kind of would love opportunities to like ruffle some feathers a little bit, but there's just so much culture being made right now. I feel like people are self-selecting in a way.
Yeah.
And maybe we're not doing the thing of like putting challenging images in front of people and changing their minds as much as we can, or like that's harder to do these days.
It's harder to do these days because there's something for everyone online and politically, and I mean that kind of carefully curated world that we can all make for ourselves actually means that we're not sort of like communicating across difference so much.
Yeah, it seems like some people are like really growing and thriving and like expanding in this world, and then some people are like kind of just doing what they would have been doing otherwise.
Yeah.
I mean, I get pushback from all sides. I think because that whole like spiel I gave on like not, I don't want to say not subscribing, but not really kind of existing in any kind of spectrum. So even like with my film Spork, there was 2 gay bear dads in it, and like here I am in a straight film festival like Tribeca, with this grassroots film that I like made on my own, and then all these straight people are like audience award. I'm like, this is so hot, that's so hype, like dude. And then I go to Outfest and other gay film festivals that are like these big gay scenes that are supposed to be outlets, and they were giving me so much fever over the gay bear dad scene. I'm like, bro, like what's, and mind you, the villain in the film was blackface. I'm like, oh, that doesn't bother you? But like, and then there's a term where one of the little
So wait, I'm sorry. Could you? I'm sorry. The villain in the film has blackface.
the villain in the film does blackface.
Does
yeah,
blackface
to make fun of the protagonist of the film.
Okay.
She's like the whole like the higher the.
I think I need to
anti-girl.
see this film.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, the little kid in the film, his name is Charlie. He's like this kind of effeminate, male, and someone calls him a faggot. So the gay scene was like always just giving me flex on it. But then in the straight scene, they were like kind of like there are other festivals, like Berlin was just like, I don't know, it's a little weird, it's very controversial, and HBO was going to distribute it, but they wanted me to take out all this stuff, and it basically wasn't the film anymore. I'm like, dude. So, and then the same with the blackface. It's like, can you take this out, this and that? I'm like, no. And the same, the fact that I would have certain characters in the film that it's like, you don't represent them. I'm like, bro, this is brutal. So pushback just on one project, let alone all my stuff. And studio pitches, like, you can't do this, or this is too gay, or this is not gay enough. And I don't know, man. This is where I think empathy is something that really helps me out, because I get it. I'm like, I know why you feel like that. I get why you feel like that. How could I be so stupid? Of course I understand why you feel like that. And the same for even the gay bear dad scene. I knew the person talking to me was an older gay person who was like, bitch, that's not funny. I fought really hard for gay rights and for like 2 men to get married. I'm like, I feel you. I do, I feel you. And the same with the straight scene. They're like, I find this obscene. I'm like, I don't find it obscene, but I understand in your world.
Heterosexual sex is obscene sometimes.
Well, but my point is that just to finish it, like to top it off, my way of dealing with it was honestly, like as hokey as it sounds, was empathy with action. Empathy with action. Being like, I feel you, I totally get where you're coming from, and I grasp it. I'm not stupefied by it. But with that said, this is the reality of it, and this is where we're progressing. There's an evolution to our
I
species.
think for us, like the feedback from our communities and our audiences is like really a place where we grow and listen, and it's like we have had so many lessons, and we're always trying to learn from the people who are criticizing us, who are either filmmakers or watching. And then it's kind of like we're getting pushed from both directions.
Yeah.
And from one direction, I feel like we're listening and learning, and the other direction, it's affirming why we do the work that we do. Like, it is important work because there is so much pushback.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, we're doing the real important work, which is learning and growing in community.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
For real, yeah.
It's how
We're
you
also
know you're
wearing
doing
the same
something
socks.
right when you get pushed
Exactly,
back,
and
right?
that you're
It's the
growing
real
and
thing.
changing and doing the best that you could do.
Well, I think it's also our job to.
We're wearing the same
Not the
socks.
future, mama.
I was just gonna say that I think it's really all about context. The blackface, I haven't seen the film,
Exactly,
but it's all about. I think that our responsibility as artists, especially if we're doing difficult things, is to create the context. You know, you can with the proper context, you can do anything. You know, if it's like framed in the right way. And so yeah.
Well, it's like you said, representation. There are certain men that make female-oriented films where it's like, how dare you? And there are certain people that will do that
Tyler
aren't
Perry,
of that.
yeah.
You know, or whatever. But like, based on empathy, I gotta eat my own crow. Like, it's true. You're right. There are, and so I find myself having to use communication to keep myself from being parallel to certain things, and that's where I think communication is important, because it's not really, blanket statements just aren't healthy for anyone. It's not fair for straight people to say gay people are this, trans are this, you know, non-binary is this. I'm like, you can't really blanket statement anything. But then non-binary, trans, and gay people and lesbians can't blanket statement in the reverse. I'm like, but it's not fair. There are men that, if done the right way and if coming from the right place, could potentially be that person, a vessel that makes a film that's really good for women's rights. And there could be someone that is trans or non-binary that can do a heterosexual story that's really good for the species. And like, it just depends on who you are, even though there are a bunch of antis that make it hard to make that discerning. It's like, well,
I think one of the other.
You can't be heterosexual for a good cause.
Someone
to do it.
So you've screened in like some of the same festivals I've screened in LA, right? And
Yeah.
so if you at some unnamed big gay festival in LA have, let's say, a screening that's called like Boys Shorts,
Yeah.
I guarantee, and of course they're not called that, and there's no such festival like this, because I actually have very much enjoyed being part of this festival. But anyway, if you have a screening called Boys Shorts and you look at the line, it's so segregated. It's generally a bunch of white muscle queens that are there for Boys Shorts. Then I had a friend who curated a screening there that was a little bit more experimental, a real mix. And everybody walked out, literally. I was the only person that stayed, and I can't say the person's name, but it was pushing the boundaries.
Down with Dennis.
It's just so much putting in boxes, and then it's like then the shorts that are made outside of the studio machine are still then put into these, you know, these boxes, which are the festivals, and then they will put forward the really like mainstream, like, you know, short with like the two really attractive like white gay guys on Venice Beach or whatever it might be. Just the way it's all segregated, I don't know. It's still disheartening, and the reason I bring it up is because Outsider Fest and the Mix Festival in New York are the only festivals that I know of, and I've been screening for 30 plus years. I will say it's the only festivals I know of where you can be a non-queer person making queer work and still get screened, or you can be a queer person making work not about queer life or yourself and still get screened. I'm going to say that's two out of the whole world that I'm aware of, honestly. And I really look for these festivals because I'm making movies about Coney Island. They're queer because they're from me. Like, I have queer sensibility and everything about me, sure. It's like walking in a gay pride parade 24/7, as I've been told. But, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want it that binary, that boxed in. And so I just want to say I appreciate so very much this about Outsider. It's really unusual, and I hope that it will be a real inspiration to the rest of the uptight kind of boxed in festivals out there.
Thank you.
Seriously,
Thanks. I will say, as someone who was part of the founding group, a lot of us had traveled to these kinds of festivals, had these experiences ourselves as artists, as filmmakers, and so I think very much that thought kind of came into here in terms of like where things can just kind of cross and blur.
You feel it.
What is it? Yeah.
Yeah, my
you know,
movies at
experience
those
it.
festivals are put in girls' shorts.
Oh,
I've never
gosh.
identified as a girl in my entire life. Never. And let me tell you, my movies are generally about like fag sex or something of the sort. They don't belong in those, you know, in those programs because people walk out. but hey. From the John Waters School of Filmmaking, that is a compliment. I'll take it.
I think Rob, you had a comment or a question?
Yeah. First of all, thank you all so much for this conversation. This is like beautiful to witness. This is like really empowering and exciting. I'm so glad. Who brought up bell hooks?
Oh, I did.
Thank you for bringing up bell hooks because I feel like she's like a big key to this whole conversation, especially when we're talking about capitalism mixed with white supremacy mixed with patriarchy. And we keep going back to money, but we're not talking about the fact that like money is inherently white supremacist in this country. You know, like look at the faces on your money, right? That's who's backing your projects.
Well, Harriet Tubman was going to be on the money for like 5 minutes.
Right.
The Trump people were like, no, we're not, this isn't going to happen. So go on.
Yeah, no, just like the faces, like faces of these presidents, the founding fathers, their values, or what are like what money oftentimes supports, which is like when you're talking about racist, stereotypical depictions of like people of color, or just these like super, just like old, tired depictions of like gay, lesbian folks, or these binaries about men and women, or all these kinds of stories, or how we talk about indigenous people in this country and their representations. I mean, the money that pays for those, and the money that pays well for those depictions, are oftentimes ones that support the narratives of like white supremacy and patriarchy, right? And so it's like, it makes so much sense why those like stereotypical ass depictions get the most. Oh my god. Ooh. I'm sorry. Oh my god, bro. I'm sorry. Give me my sandwich.
In what I do, it's interesting. The money is what a lot of the artists I work with, who are almost all people of color, all queer, trans, or femme identified, they want into the system because they want a living. But then the way the system sees them is their story is a piece of intellectual property, right? And they literally use the term exploit intellectual property, right? That's what they're trying to exploit. And so when you have that attitude towards someone's story, you don't care about the complexity of their humanity, right? You care about what is the existing audience for that story, and the existing audience is what the ideology of our country has been, which are all these things, and it includes everybody, right? Like, as you mentioned, like, black people have white supremacist ideologies and don't know it, right? And so it is really hard to challenge that because the existing market is, of course, based on decades and decades and decades of just, like, shit that hasn't been lodged.
Centuries even.
Centuries, right. So, it's interesting for me to be like in that space of like, as a scholar, I critique that system and know it's super fucked up, but also know that people gotta eat, right? And there's no money, like we all in this panel said we don't make money for what we do, right? Outside of people just completely disavowing capitalism, which is kind of impossible when
we could
money...
get close to that though.
Yeah.
That's why Bernie, if you want to vote, I mean, like closer to a socialist, democratic socialist like, ideology is, you know, the way to go.
Yeah, I think people don't know how liberating.
You know what's actually funny? So when you mentioned bell hooks, and we were talking about cyberspace and the internet, and it's like just because it's a system that is again relatively designed by like white straight men and regulated by white straight men.
Literally by
their
white straight men,
money.
Literally,
you know, and like watching what happens to my sex worker friends just getting regulated on Instagram or whatever. The most fucked up thing, tying kind of some of this together, is I wanted to show some of my students like bell hooks' writing because I teach film, and at a relatively conservative school.
Was it Reel to Reel, the Reel to Reel book?
No, I was specifically I wanted to show men, masculinity, and love, because I was I teach like a lot of...
We Real Cool, Men, Masculinity, and Love. Yeah.
Okay, it's like my favorite book.
It's my favorite book too.
Okay, right on. Okay, but the story is, I Googled bell hooks books. I just literally typed in bell hooks books. Steve Harvey's Think Like a Man, Act Like a Woman. Do it on your phone right now. That's the first thing that comes up when you type bell hooks books into Google. It's fucking insane. It's
What a
just
world.
fucking insane.
What a world.
Yeah.
Because on the internet, that is the redirection that's taking place.
Yeah.
Folks, we don't have that fucking straight dude with money interrupting our party right now.
Yeah.
So it needs to be party over here, divest over there, is my feeling. Although we see how large my career has gotten.
So I have this question, so kind of like, just like this undercurrent here that I was thinking about, especially when you were talking about using certain mechanisms to like dismantle. So what I was thinking about was the whole nasty fruits idea. Just the idea of like how bananas quicken the ripening, like a ripe banana quickens the ripening of another ripe banana and stuff like that. So when you were talking about how this fucking Dennis is out here talking about some ain't nobody gonna watch this motherfucking films and shit. And then that's when later he's like teaching these things on queer. So that means that still that some form of spoiling happened through his interaction. And like, so I'm wondering like what y'all think about even using those mechanisms against the system, like planting those seeds. So at least like how we see things are trending now, and so that's how it's kind of opened up this kind of, even if it's like a shallow acceptance, that's a start, right? You know, so it's like how can we use that ripening to kind of like use those mechanisms, even those mechanisms of appropriation against them, so that they actually end up changing things. You know, like what do you think about that? Or like how do you think we could do that?
Experience that just speaks to, I think, pretty directly. I was a guest teacher, guest artist at a Christian private college in the Bay Area. I won't name its name. And I've been in academia 20 years, I'm sorry. But I am queer, you might not be able to tell that about me, and so I was going there as a queer filmmaker, and this was just a regular production class, and the class boycotted. Like more than half the class boycotted and didn't come to the class. They wrote letters to the administration too, and they protested outside. They wouldn't come in because I was in the room because of my sinning. And then I showed a Sadie Benning movie where she discussed childhood sexual abuse and other things, and the same students were going, God, she's such a whore. I can't believe she made a movie about that. And this is like really good experimental video and very deep and very just beautiful stuff. And then, yeah, so they were boycotting me. They said, we don't want to talk to you. We don't want to see your movies. We don't want to have anything to do with you. And then I got talking to the two ringleaders of this. And I was like, hey, I do animation. It's like, hey, you like Joan Jett? Okay. And we talked a little bit. And then, they literally said, secretly they may have liked her. But I got the actual line, you know, I never met a gay before, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Like, I never thought people would be so direct about it. It was a great experience. And then the students who boycotted the class talked to the teacher the next week, and they said they made a mistake because they talked to their cheerleading sisters who had told them they talked to me, and I was still human. So, I don't know. I felt like I maybe somehow opened something up for them.
With your right fruit.
My right
No, right. You said right.
I feel like when we make our own work, when we tell our own perspectives, it's always going against like that, that system. And when we lift each other
if your
up,
own perspective, not necessarily.
Yeah, you're right. But and when we lift those up, we can help each other amplify those voices. And I feel like everything that we're doing, all of our work, all of our art projects, like just literally putting it out in the world is like resisting the shit. And I think art making in practice, especially since none of us are able to make our live or not able to live like we would want to from the income of that, it's clear that it's not a capitalist venture. It's clear, if the art is not paying for us to live the way that we want to, it's clear that the making of the art is already outside of the system and what it wants us to do with our lives. I feel like just making art in whatever form it is both healing, is spiritual, is radical, is important, and does what we want against the system.
I think
Being an artist.
It's really powerful, like all these examples are like, yeah, there's all this normative stuff, but then like one interaction with something against that norm can like spoil you, right? And then like you can't become once you've been spoiled, once the fruit is spoiled, it can't become ripe and edible again, right? So I like this metaphor of like there's so much going against a kind of queer worldview, but then once people are exposed to it, they might resist it at first, but then they're like they can't forget it, and it sticks with them.
Well, I think now the conversation is really like the queer stuff that is like corporate versus the stuff that's not corporate.
Right.
You know, because RuPaul has been such a brilliant person at selling, sort of house culture to the masses when he wasn't a part of like ballroom culture. When he was in New York, he was an East Village, Lower East Side person, but he's marketed that and just sold it. Brilliant. I mean, a brilliant capitalist way. I mean, I can't hate the game, not the player, but then that sort of necessitates the kind of conversation of like this is the thing that has been able to be, and then like you got that other white guy who produces Pose. What is his name? Ryan Murphy, who's like got sort of and so there's a different kind of conversation. Like this is, and I actually could have told you when Jenny Livingston made Paris is Burning, like back then, that this was a troubling moment. That really led to this moment that we're in now. This thing that like, where this white lesbian woman, no offense to any white lesbians in the room, but like was imagining all these black, queer, and Latino sort of like people, and then that was this thing that like white culture was able to embrace and celebrate, and then it sort of produced this moment that we're in now, where there's this very corporate moment of like a certain kind of queerness, and so then what constitutes the moments that are not that, the things that can't be visible in that. Or even like in the peripheral vision of that world is the conversation.
Pose talks about the corporate moments within the show too, so that push-pull is.
I've never watched it, so maybe I should check it out.
Well, that kind of where it all gets wrapped up together.
But I wanted to thank you and highlight your perspective on that, on how like your engagement with Dennis turned into like the rotting of the fruit. But this whole idea of like rotting of the fruit, obviously the translation to that in literal terms would be conscious expansion, like awareness. That's basically what rotting the fruit means. And like it's just you become conscious, and that connects to the whole empathy thing. Like I do think there's a bigger picture, and you pointed it out right there. Like that's so beautiful. Like obviously it's connected, and we're all gonna be dead one day. These bodies are so forever. It's a blip on the radar.
But it's deep though. I mean, to talk about Paris is Burning again, the Jenny Livingston moment was the one where her fruit was ripened because she didn't know she was a lesbian somehow until she started hanging out with all these like queer people, and so that there's that one thing. But then the film she made is still something that's very colonial. It's something that's very much like her sort of being behind the camera, looking very anthropologically at this culture, and so even though her sort of like, and it's very traditional kind of colonial narrative, like you go into the darkness and then you come out a different person, so it's really a story about the white person going into darkness and really like less about like the people who were sort of like subject to the kind of capital and kind of exploitation that she embodies as a filmmaker, and that also mirrors in the society in this moment. So it's complicated, this thing of empathy, because like it always comes back to this thing of how do you empower people to sort of have a sort of self-determining moment. I mean, like we love well-meaning white people, that's fine, but I'm much more interested in people imagining themselves rather than sort of like a well-meaning white person imagining me or anyone.
For sure. That's why it's called conscious expansion or awareness. Like all this stuff on like white capitalism and money and stuff, but then again, like if I've been to art festivals, this one in particular is a bit different, so this is incredible to me, to be honest. Even the people in this room, I'm like, holy shit, this is dope. But in most cases, in a lot of cases, I've seen art festivals kind of with the same tip, that it's like capitalism, money, it's, damn the system, and then like Peaches or Grimes or some successful artist walks in, everyone's like, ooh, like they're doing the same shit. I'm like, in their own community. I'm like, but here you are, and the same with like visual stuff with gays and men, and it's like this image of gay men, and then when that guy's in the room, everyone's trying to fuck him. I'm like, really, bitch? So there's this constant like lack of bigger picture awareness, and me growing up white, my dad is from India, and I am biracial, but I look white.
Yeah, you do.
You know what I'm saying? But my name is Jasbir Singh. Like I can speak Punjabi. I had to go to India, and then I go to India, and I'm considered white. I'm with my white family, and they're like, "You're like that guy from Simpsons." Like I get that whole family, the Abu, the like cashier guy.
Lord have mercy. Okay.
And then, with all that said, being white and growing up super impoverished, I had a stepdad because my mom and dad split super young. And then this white man raised me. We were always struggling. And like, not to get hella thick, and I'm totally good. But, he took his life. And this is my dad. and he took his life because of poverty. So my mom could get this like cheap ass insurance thing that he was the last thing he had. I want to get emotional, but like that's real, and I was surrounded by
Can
poor
you make
white
a movie
people.
about that?
No, actually, I'd rather make a movie on how I survived it and what I learned from it and how it made me actually understand other people, because that's what I want to share. Because I'm surrounded by darkness. Like, I'm not head in the sand. The world is full of darkness, but it's also full of growth and light and bigger scopes and Dennis's that fucking get woke and Outfest, which is changing drastically. Thank God. Like, there are all these ways that change, and I think that these blanket statements and these blanket terms, when they're used towards any of us, is so cruel. But when we put them outwards, I'm like, but it could also cause a lot of damage.
But I don't think anyone in this room has been putting up.
No. Well, that's what I said. This place is a little different. Like, there's some kind of
I think it's a lot different.
Juju vibes here.
Yeah.
But it does get blurry when like like nice white people or stuff like that, or so there's like, oh, but you're cool, and that it can come across as dismissive, especially when there are white people who are like, look, my path has not been privileged, and that doesn't mean white privilege isn't real. It doesn't mean the problem isn't real.
Yeah.
It just means that the reaction to a real problem can be adjusted for an actual growth.
Yeah.
So
I really do want white people to grow in like deep, profound ways. So,
and likewise, same with the black community. The whole download thing, the anti-gay thing, and the black world. And mind you, I do art therapy 3 days a week in South Central for these kids because I grew up in that place. So I'm happy to do it. I've been doing it for 3 years. We do art and all this stuff. And the school is predominantly, obviously, I'm the only guy with blue eyes, like for miles. And I got a whole bunch of black kids that they call Oreos because they talk white and because they listen to rock and they have a whole, and I do art therapy and they come to me crying, they're like 15, 16, and all the black kids are like, you're white ass, like they shred them. And I feel for them, it sucks. I have kids who are in the closet because they can't come out because the Latino community is like so against it in the hood. It's like, this is gang central. So I don't know, man. I just feel like the double standards, it's not less to be like, we're all evil and bad, and it's more like we all can grow for the sake of growing.
All of these things are very old. I think the main thing is people sort of like being able to, as educators, as artists, that we, are empowering everyone to think for themselves. I mean, to not be so invested in, sort of joining groups or being accepted within groups, that you can sort of stand, in like a profound difference, in a profoundly different space. And that's all right, I think all of us recall all kinds of things when we were growing up. I mean,
of course.
It's like, that for me is an overwhelming narrative for me because I always had my imagination, like I always had a deep interior life where like I was imagining all these things for myself, and I think that is the greatest gift you can give to any sort of person growing into themselves. Is some kind of way, a critical space. And Bell Hooks, I always want to give Bell Hooks a lot of love because there was this opening when I first read her of like all this space, that she created. She doesn't get the same kind of love from all these like new feminists, black feminists out there. Like she isn't like praised and celebrated in the way that I think she should be. So I just want to just like give her lots of love. But I mean you want to provide for people like, these openings where then they can sort of be empowered to stand in whatever truth they have. That isn't about groupthink or sort of like conforming to what's around them, but that they can really sort of have their own path and their own voice.
For everybody.
For everyone, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just like you have to operate on two registers, right? There's like this historical shit that's like there have been groups and types of people that have exploited and harmed, right?
Yes.
Proportionally more than others.
And we have to tell the truth about that, yeah.
And you have to tell the truth about that, but you also have to, in these moments, see that you're dealing with a person with a very particular history that isn't a systemic social cultural history, right? I mean, we're all related to these big concepts, but we're also all distinct, and that's just like the complexity of culture. And I feel like so often in culture we get wrapped up in the terms and the history, and then we graft that onto people, and we don't know that actually, okay, well, this person might be different from that. They might be able to shift. I think it's just attention that we just like hold.
We do have to pay attention to the way people treat us in the way that they're acting, and if they're the way that they're treating us and the way that they're acting is consistent with that history and system, then we have to, maybe, have a moment with them, or a moment away from them, many moments away from them.
Or a moment with them and then away from them.
Many moments away.
So I want to be mindful of time because there are going to be performances that start at 2 o'clock at the Vortex. But before we end the session, I would love for everyone to just go quickly around and say if you have a showcase or something coming up, if you could give us information about that, and if you've already had a showcase, maybe information on where else people can find you in the world.
Cool. My screening is tomorrow at 2 p.m. at the Vortex called Bad and Black. Queer pilots from OTV. It'll be Black, queer, trans, video art, comedy pilots, drama. Some of it's online, some of it's exclusive to this space. It's going to be a lot of fun. Check it out.
2 o'clock?
2 o'clock.
Cool. I have videos in the tonight 10:30 performance of Shaboom. You get to see Nancy Reagan snatch, not trying to brag or anything. Little something for y'all. But yeah, so that's 10:30 tonight. And if you want to see my other work, like my movies, they're on YouTube. Samara Halperin. There's a whole bunch of them on there, all kinds. Very queer.
My piece, The Lynching Suite, was on Thursday. I am absolutely in love with Austin and this festival and the audience here. I was in tears actually. This last year has been a really difficult year for me to be doing what I do, and it was very emotional to have the kind of reception that I got again. Like it was mirrored what happened last year, so it really means a lot to me. My next show is in San Francisco at ODC, if anyone lives there. It's March 6th, which is a Friday. It's with the Living Oath Show. We're doing a piece called Lord to Embellish the Birth of the Negro Superman. It's also an album that you can listen to on Spotify. And there are 2 videos. One of my latest videos is called Discipline from that record. It's a fun little video that I directed myself. You should really, I think, have you watched it? It's really, go check out Discipline. I think it's a really fun little video. It's on YouTube. Yeah. And on my website, aymar.com. So yeah.
So we have our Hot Bit screen tonight at 8 p.m. at the tent at Vortex.
And we were, it was limited to standing room only last year, so folks got turned away, so come early. Also, we're here with our other collaborators, Arizal, Stokely, and Top Shelf. I'm sure any of us would be down to talk to whomever.
Oh, we also are still accepting submissions for our next festival. The submission deadline is February 29th.
Which is in 1 week from today.
Yes, so we want more submissions, so.
If anyone
Yeah.
has submissions for us, anybody snatch. Yes.
Anyone want to
Real quick. And follow us online at Hotbits Film Fest.
My film, The Art of Being, already screened, so you missed it, I'm sorry. But it's on my YouTube page, and my film Sport is on my YouTube page as well, my director's cut, because I'm like, whatever, I want everyone to see it. It's J as in Jacob, B as in boy, JB like the Scotch, JB Ghuman, G human, JB Ghuman Jr. So yeah, go watch it.
So this, unfortunately, is the last conference on the couch for this festival.
Thanks, everyone.
But we hope that these conversations continue, all throughout, we'll be at the Vortex all day. There's, if you didn't know, there's like a letter writing that's happening with Sin Fronteras, Diversidad Sin Fronteras, that's at 3 o'clock. Yulia, Lenina is at 2 o'clock. But we hope that, the space that we are creating, the community that we are creating, goes throughout all the way until the end of the festival, which is Sunday evening, which will be at the Sahara Lounge for Lesbian Wedding. So, with Agra. And Rob spinning, and other people. So, so can we just get a round of applause for our panelists?